Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Mark Josephsberg, who's an Alexander Technique teacher in New York City. And we're going to talk today about an interesting phenomenon that I think many Alexander Technique teachers encounter. And I'll say more about what this phenomenon is, but Mark's going to interview me, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Robert. And welcome back to your show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And I hear you want to talk about some kind of Alexander Technique lessons teacher student phenomenon.
Yes, that's exactly what I want to talk about. And it doesn't have a nice, neat, short name, but I would describe it as the phenomenon that I think many teachers have experienced over the years, which is a student comes for lessons. The student makes extremely good progress, makes changes occur that are obvious to the student, often obvious to people around the student within the first lesson or two or maybe three. And everyone knows that good things have happened, at least from our point of view, good things have happened, and the student disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know from talking to you just before the podcast that you've experienced that, and I believe most teachers have over
I've
the years.
experienced it, and some teacher friends of mine have described all kinds of ways that happens.
Right, and in fact,
Amazing.
yeah, and I first heard of this phenomenon when I was on my training course in England, and Paul Collins, one of the directors, was giving a little talk to us students one day, and he referenced it. He said you're going to run into students who make dramatic changes very quickly, and then you'll never hear from them again.
Mm-hmm.
And just be prepared for that is
Yeah, I
basically what he
think, and
said.
most of the time, I think, when people make dramatic changes, they do return. But
Hmm.
there is a large percentage or a large group that don't. And it's almost like the more dramatic the change, the,
Sometimes it seems that way. Yeah,
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 yeah.
and yeah. So I mean, as you say, most people who make dramatic changes at the beginning continue because they want more, and it's not. But there are people in this category, and I've been thinking about this on and off over the years. And the other day, I thought, uh, I should do a podcast about this, and I should get Mark to interview me because I'm sure he'll have some things to say too. And I've come up with four or possibly four and a half explanations, and I want to just run through them fairly quickly. And with each one, I'd like you to add anything that you would like to add to it. And then when I get through my stuff, you might want to add another explanation or two or three.
Okay.
How does that sound?
Sounds great.
So the first explanation is the student got everything they needed, and why bother coming back for more lessons? And in a way, I'm quite sympathetic to that, and because I've known of cases, and I've had a few students who really they had a very specific issue that was bothering them, and it was very quickly sorted out by some basic Alexander work, and often within a few minutes. And I assume that that was what they came for. That's what they got. So why should they come back? And
Hmm.
and that to me is the most positive spin I can put on the whole phenomenon.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you've encountered that sort of thing from time to
That
time.
sort of thing. And I would say that whatever your next three or four are,
Hmm.
there are probably people that fit into every one of those four or five categories.
Could be, yeah, yeah. So that's number one. I think
Mhm.
that's the sort of obvious one that we can dispense with pretty quickly. The second one is, and this is a very sort of Alexandrian view of the world, I suppose, but that when we help people to change long-standing patterns, um, and that we do it by engaging their thinking and observational skills about themselves, they are at some level forced to confront something that may not be all that comfortable, which is to some extent, at least, they were responsible for their previous issues, pain or discomfort. And for some people, that's not a pleasant. It's not pleasant to confront that. I often tell my students, the truth. The truth of it is that you are ultimately responsible for yourself. And I often use a quote from an old comic strip called Pogo. It doesn't exist anymore. But there was a wonderful quote where one guy says to the other, "We have met the enemy, and they is us." And I put that out there as you could look at that as good news or bad news. It's bad news in that you have to kind of own up at some level that you may have been responsible. But on the other hand, it also tells you that you have the power to change it. And I think there's some people for whom that responsibility, taking on that responsibility, thing's a little scary, and they may just leave for that reason.
I came into the Alexander technique for extreme neck pain, and when my teacher must have told me that you're kind of responsible, or for me, it was incredibly empowering, uplifting, and powerful, because I could say, finally, I could do something about this, and that felt great to me.
Right.
But what you're saying here, if the connection is not just that you're causing, your neck pain because you're slumping, but if it gets tied in, and I don't know your next three ideas, if it gets tied in with some kind of emotional part of it, or there's some kind of fear, I mean, it could be leading to something that's very deep, and they don't want to confront that.
That absolutely. I think it at some level, Alexander work does ask people to see things about themselves more clearly, and some of those things they may not be too crazy about.
Yeah.
So that's certainly an explanation, a possible explanation. My third is that I've had students who have come with specific conditions that have names, and they've been diagnosed, as it were, and they are sometimes fairly active members of support groups, for example, of those kinds of conditions, for people with those kinds of conditions. And I've had a few examples of where the condition changed very dramatically, very quickly, with a bit of Alexander work, and the student would come back maybe for a second or even third lesson, and the thing that they came for has kind of faded out, and they don't really almost want to talk about it much anymore. And I think it could be because it undermines their identity in that group.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And I have one very specific client in mind, but that person was kind of the extreme example. She had a condition that had a very tiny number of people in it worldwide, but it had just recently become sort of certified as a legitimate thing. And she was very active in the organization of people who have that. And she came for her second lesson, and it was I don't want to really name the condition, but it was obvious that it had gone. And I commented on that, and she said, "Oh yeah." But it was like, I remember thinking, that's strange. I would have thought that would have been a big deal for her. And,
right.
Because it was something that certainly limited her in some very definite ways. So anyway, she had one more lesson and that was it. Now, I will say that she recommended me to other people, not people with that condition, however, of which she knew a number. So that's, I think, a possibility that your identity or your social network even is a little disrupted if you no longer have symptoms of the condition that that network is based on.
That makes total sense to me, and I think that is the reason for some people.
Yeah. And I have a sort of a part B of that, which is it doesn't necessarily have to be a social network based of other people with that condition. It could be a social network like, say, a marriage, where
Right.
part of that relationship has shifted to one spouse looking after the other in certain ways because of their condition.
Absolutely.
And if that condition changes for the better, then there is some rearrangement that has to go on in that relationship. And I'm pretty sure of a couple of students I've had, because I actually met their spouses, that may well have been why they stopped coming after, in both cases, I think 2 or 3 lessons, when there were just these huge obvious changes for the better.
Right.
And it was almost like it was too much to integrate into their marriage.
It's interesting. It would change things, and the marriages at that time or whatever was more
Yeah.
important.
So, both these and the one before, I mean, they're kind of like secondary effects that we may not think about, but could be quite important for students and could explain this phenomenon that we're talking about.
Right.
Now, the fourth reason is, yeah, they had great results. They probably would like to continue getting more and learning more, but there's something about you, the teacher, they can't stand.
That would be impossible with me, but go
Well,
ahead.
not with you, but
Hmm.
for the rest of us, it could just be some weird personality thing, or who knows, that they just, yeah, I got these improvements, but I so dislike going to this teacher that I'm not going to continue. The nearest thing that I can think of in my own perusal of Alexander lessons over the years was a teacher that I had lessons with when I was on my training course and for a couple of years afterwards, who I like this teacher a lot, but she was an extreme cat person, and over the years, her one-bedroom apartment went from 5 cats to about 70, and they weren't out in the teaching area, but their effects were. Let's put it that
Yes.
way.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, especially in the summer when it was really hot, it was not that pleasant to be there.
Right.
Now I could put up with it, for the work was good and I was willing to put up with it, but some people might not be able to.
Or it wouldn't go for the first lesson once you heard
Yeah,
that they have a cat because they're allergic.
right.
But in that kind of case, it would seem like if they're really making tremendous changes, they would just find another teacher.
Well, that may be, and of course, if you're in a location where there are other teachers, someone may just no longer see you, but you later learn they've gone on and had lessons with someone else.
Right. And this
So
is New York City where I am, and here you basically you trip on Alexander teachers all the time.
exactly. So I mean, those are the reasons that I've thought of. Do you
Hmm.
have anything to add to that?
Just an overarching thing that I just been thinking about for this last couple of hours. And it's that, and this may apply to everything that we've said, but basically it's like an Alexander, more of an Alexander technique explanation having to do with our thinking and the brain.
Hmm.
And if you keep firing the same neural patterns, clusters of neurons are firing together in your brain. You're hardwiring your brain in a certain way.
Hmm.
So let's say somebody has been hardwiring their brain to think that alternative therapies, whatever, the Alexander technique, it's all, I'm skeptical. It's a bunch
Hmm.
of bull.
Hmm.
And let's say you've had that for years, then you run into a neck condition or a back condition. You
Hmm.
try everything, nothing's working. Finally, somebody says you should try the Alexander technique, and you go, oh, okay. They try it, and amazing changes happen.
Hmm.
but they have these neural connections that are so strong, and the new one is so weak because it's just brand new.
Hmm.
Even though the evidence is there, all it takes is one little thought, or somebody says, "Wow, how was the lesson?" They go, "It was great." "What'd you do?" "Well, we just kind of sat there, and I stood up and I sat down." What is the Alexander technique? And I can't. It's not posture. It's something. They're already weakening it. And
Yeah.
even though the evidence is there that they've gotten better,
Uh-huh.
they'll quickly go back into those strong connections and just be repulsed by the Alexander technique, repelled, and attracted to what they've always gotten, which is pain. And this kind of stuff doesn't work.
And maybe they could come up with some other explanation
Yes.
of why they got better.
Oh,
If they really
that's
think
so.
that the Alexander technique is in a category of things that are no good,
Mhm.
and some good happens, then they might be forced to come up with an explanation of something else that was the real cause, and they don't want to continue to be hoodwinked by this Alexander charlatan kind of
Right.
person.
So basically, it's
Yeah.
what we teach. It's habit. They have this very strong mental habit.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that, but because you are often asking people uh, to really change their view of themselves and their relationship with the world.
mhm.
And some people are just fine with that. I had a Skype student the other day who's she said to me, "You're really rocking my world,"
Yep.
And
Yep.
but she was saying it in a really positive way.
Right.
She was not
Not
the
in a defensive
not
way.
at all. No,
Yeah.
she was just musing on the fact that a whole lot of assumptions that she had about what what how the mind and body are connected and all that have been kind of tossed aside.
And maybe making assumptions is just a mental habit.
Yeah, well, she is the kind of person who's absolutely fine with that, but not everybody is.
Nope.
And so, anything else you want to add?
No. No, I think this was really good. I think it's an important subject, and I think it's important for a lot of people, including newer Alexander teachers.
Yeah. Oh, I think actually, I'm so glad that I got that advice from Paul Collins back on the
Mm.
training course because this came up for me literally in the first 2 weeks of teaching. It
Hmm.
was probably my second or third student, and exactly this happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just that she noticed the changes, that she went away for a weekend and people saw her and commented, and all that stuff. And she came back for a second lesson, and she mentioned all that, and then I never saw her again.
Another topic about this would be what can we, knowing that this is true for any number of reasons we mentioned, or 10 others, what
Hmm.
could we do about it? What would help?
Yeah, and I don't know. I
I
don't
don't
know
either.
what would happen. But why don't we put this out there to Alexander teachers and students who listen to this? If you have certainly any ideas of other reasons that we haven't thought of, please let me know. And if you have any ideas of how this problem could be lessened, if we want
Mm,
to, if it's a problem, I guess it's kind of a problem in the sense that it does seem to me that some people are missing out on some good stuff.
hmm
But yeah, let me know, and we could always do another podcast, or maybe I'll write a blog about it and put this interview in the blog. I do think it's a fascinating topic, and it's not one that I hear talked about a lot. But whenever I've brought it up with people, they've all said I've had that experience several times. So
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, hey Mark, my guest today, Mark Josephsberg, um, is an Alexander teacher in New York City So if you're interested in the technique and want to study, Mark's there in New York, and I'll put a link to his website by the interview. I'll also put a link to a website that tells you more about the Alexander technique and will help you find a teacher anywhere in the world. Mark, thanks so much for this.
Thank you, Robert. It was really great.